there, my name's Paul Tobin. I'm a concept designer at Weta Workshop, and I'm also a freelance illustrator. I also teach part-time here in New Zealand when I get the chance. So firstly, I'd just like to welcome you to this Gnomon Masterclass. I think Masterclass sounds pretty intimidating. I'd like to think that after only being in the industry for about 8 years, that I've certainly climbed a few rungs up the ladder, but I wouldn't consider myself to be as such a master yet, especially when you compare some of the other people that I've worked with, that have been doing this for, 20 or 30 years. That kind of level of experience is pretty mind-boggling. So what this class is going to be about predominantly is it's focusing on my design process and illustration process for a freelance job that I did for a magazine called Coil House magazine. Now I've got a picture here of the cover, which gives you some idea of what the magazine is about. It's a very, very cool magazine, and I was very fortunate enough to be approached by one of the creative editors, Meredith Yayanos, who was based here in Wellington for a while. She commissioned myself and Greg Broadmoor to do some illustrations for this particular issue around a story about Chinese pulp fiction. So obviously I'm going to need to give you just a very brief backgrounder on what the brief was, so that will inform you as to why I chose to do certain things and how I went about sort of producing the illustration. Now, being a concept designer as well as an illustrator, and in fact a full-time concept designer, so I tend to do more design than illustration, obviously a big part of how I approach illustration now is through the eyes of a concept designer. And so this particular masterclass, I suppose I'm going to try to not just talk about illustrative technique, but also, more importantly perhaps, how you can sort of design your illustration as well. I mean, I think all illustrators design their illustration to some level. I suppose what I'm doing in this particular class is drawing on my experiences as a character designer, particularly, and costume designer at Weta, and how we approach things at Weta in terms of those kind of design techniques, and how I sort of integrate them into my illustration. So it's going to be a little bit of an experiment for me doing this workshop, but hopefully you guys enjoy it. So just to touch back to the brief. So basically, Greg got commissioned to do some interior artwork for the story, and I got commissioned to do a cover illustration for the story. And basically, before communism emerged in China, there was a very quite a large scale amount of Chinese writing, pulp writing. They were quite inspired by and appropriated a lot of Western literature and pulp stories, and one of the most popular ones was actually Sherlock Holmes. So this particular and the Sherlock Holmes in China was called Firmosi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And so he was a plagiarized version of Sherlock Holmes that showed up in the late 1800s. Now, in these knockoff stories, Holmes didn't take on ordinary human criminals so much, but rather creatures from Chinese mythology, including ghosts, fairies, foxwomen. So it's quite a different Sherlock Holmes to the one that we know sort of from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So in a nutshell, the brief was to create a dramatic image profiling this Chinese version of Sherlock Holmes alongside one of his main sort of villains, you could say, a femme fatale called the White Fox Woman, who is a mythological character. And Meredith was really keen to conjure up this really interesting fusion of Victorian West meets traditional East in the illustration.